honored to be on platform today. Take your Bibles, jump right into the Word today. Turn to Jonah, chapter 1. Jonah. I know this is a very unfamiliar story to everybody. You never heard of this character before? Don't check out on me yet, okay? Just don't check out on me yet. Just give me a chance to build the scene for you today. Jonah chapter 1. I'm going to read from 12 down to verse 16, and then we'll kind of go back and refamiliarize ourselves with this particular account. Might be something in here that you never saw before. I don't know. Maybe. Verse 12 says, Jonah speaking, he said, "Throw me into the sea." Jonah said, "and it will become calm again." How many of you use a little bit of calm? Just a little bit of calm. Just a little bit of calm in the chaos. "I know that this terrible storm is all my fault," Jonah said. Instead, the sailors rowed even harder to get the ship to the land. But the stormy sea was too violent for them, and they couldn't make it. Then they cried out to the Lord, Jonah's God. "Oh Lord," they pleaded, "don't make us die for this man's sins, and don't hold us responsible for his death. Oh Lord, you have sent this storm upon him for your own good reasons." Then the sailors picked up Jonah and threw him into the raging sea, and the storm stopped at once. Then the sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power. Well, yeah. It's easy to be awestruck afterwards. Sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power, and they offered him a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. Let me draw your attention, if you will, to two verses. Look at verse 12, and then we're going to look at verse 14, because there seems to be a bit of a contrast. "Throw me into the sea," Jonah said, "and it will become calm again. For I know that this terrible storm," somebody say storm, "is all my fault." But wait a minute. Look at verse 14. "Then they," the sailors, heathens, by the way, pagans, they cried out to the Lord, Jonah's God. "Oh Lord," they pleaded, "don't make us die for this man's sins, and don't hold us responsible for his death. Oh Lord, you have sent this storm for your own," somebody say it out loud, "good reasons." I want to speak to you this morning on the subject of grace in this storm. Grace in this storm. Because I've got some good news for somebody. See, I don't know what you're walking through today. I don't know what storm seems to be raging. I don't know what is on your sea of life. But I'm here to tell you that there is still and there will always be grace in this storm. It's easy to see grace in the storm that you came out of, because the truth is we're all in one of three places. We either just came out of the storm, we're in a storm, or we are headed into a storm. And there's always grace. It's easy to see the grace that you came out of. Oh yeah, I can see how God worked that. But I'm here to tell you today that there's good news, that there is always grace in, somebody say it, this This storm. Now, just some points of clarification, just in case I need to, because you might be here today and you might need some clarification into the context of this. If you're not familiar with, church culture or maybe you're kind of new to the scenario, within the church, storms for church people can mean anything. I mean, it's just got a hangnail, it's a storm. Can't find a parking place on Good Friday, it's a storm. Oh, God help us, I need a parking place on Black Friday. And you went knowing you're not going to find a parking place. Get up in the middle of the night, stub your toe on the bedpost, it's a storm. I'm just trying to get to the bathroom here. I've just got to go, to the restroom, and I broke my toe on the bedpost. It's a storm. We can make anything a storm. We're storm happy around the church. Woo! It's a storm. Everything's a storm. But then again, there can be some real storms, because the truth is we face storms in life. Maybe you lose your job right before Christmas. That's a legitimate storm. Yeah. See, we call a lot of things storm. Trouble in our marriage, teenager in rebellion, grandchild that you're raising in your family is in rebellion. It's a storm. Maybe I just heard this. I read it somewhere that cryptocurrency. There's a big crash in crypto. Maybe you had a bunch of money in crypto, and now your portfolio is worth nothing. That is a legitimate storm. So then the other clarification I need to make is maybe you came in here today and you are from a very, very church background. And so when I said Jonah chapter 1, you checked out. Oh, yeah, I know this. I know this story. Some of you, if you're over 40, your mind immediately went to the little cutout men sticking them on the felt board. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You colored them, and then you stuck them on the felt board, and your Sunday school teacher was, Now, if you're under 40, you're thinking about, Bob the Tomato or something, some ridiculous thing like that. Is it Bob the Tomato? I always get them mixed up. Larry the Cucumber and Bob the Tomato. What a bunch of couple of idiots. I'll take paper cutouts over Bob the Cucumber or whatever his name is, Larry the Cucumber, any day, But then again, I'm 500 years old, so, See, so either you need to understand a little bit about storms and kind of how we navigate and talk about storms, or maybe you've checked out a little bit because you're thinking, well, I've heard this story so many times. I've even seen it on the felt board. I don't need to hear it again. But there's more to Jonah than maybe what you realize or even remember. Jonah is a jolting insight into the man or woman that you might look at in the mirror every single day. See, because there's a little bit of Jonah in all of us. Jonah is a uncomfortable unveiling of the Jonah that we look at in the mirror every time we brush our teeth. And sometimes it doesn't feel good when you might even think, well, I know Jonah in me. Well, wait a minute. We just might find ourselves in here somewhere this morning. Go back to verse 1 of Jonah chapter 1, and let's look at this, because the Lord gave this message to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh, announce my judgment against it, because I have seen how wicked its people are. But Jonah got up and went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He went down to the port of Joppa, where he found a ship leaving for Tarshish, and he bought a ticket. Because rebellion will always cost you something. He paid the price. And he went on board, and here we are. Well, maybe you're holy, but here I am, hoping to escape from the Lord by sailing to Tarshish. There we are. Have you ever wanted to escape? Have you ever wanted to escape pressure? Maybe pressure on your job, or pressure in your family, or maybe in the holidays you just want to escape your family. Maybe. But you want to escape. I want to escape my spouse, or I want to escape from my kids, or I want to just escape from the responsibility, the pressure of responsibility of having to be somewhere, of having to do something, of having to say something, of having to be involved in this. Maybe I just need to escape. I need to escape the silence in my life, or I need to escape the noise of my life. See, we're all at certain times of life, we are trying to escape from something. And the truth is, and the reality is here today, some of us want to even escape God. God, I know I need to forgive that person, but I don't want to deal with that right now. I just want to escape from having to face the frustration or the fear or whatever is in my way. I don't want to have to deal with this right now. I just want to stop the world and let me off for just a minute. I just need to escape. See, we find ourselves in Jonah, and it's an uncomfortable unveiling of the Jonah in every single one of us. It's not just a kid's story that we heard years and years ago. There is an unveiling of something that we find in all of our lives. See, God told Jonah, this is the familiarity of the story. He told Jonah to get up and go to Nineveh. And Jonah gets up to go, but he doesn't go to obey. Instead, he goes to rebel. And so the Lord sends a storm. Wait a minute. I thought only the devil sent storms. I thought it was always the devil that was responsible for the chaos in my life. But in this story, we get an unveiling of something different than what we remember about the story. The Lord sends a storm, and the interesting dichotomy in this scenario, or in the description of this, is the prophet of God is rebelling, and yet the pagan sailors are praying. It's a beautiful picture of how God will use the most least likely people that you would ever think that he would use. Well, if God's going to use them, they got to look like this, and they got to have felt on the back, and they got to stick to a board. God, that's the only kind of people that God can use. They have to be a cucumber, or they have to be a tomato in order for God to really use them, because it has to look like this. But Jonah, the prophet of God, is running, and the pagan sailors are praying. And in verse 7, if you read it, basically in verse 7, they kind of roll the dice and they see, well, whose fault is it? You know, like that's the modern day version. But anyway, they kind of roll the dice. And look what verse 8 and 9 says. It falls on Jonah, the dice falls on Jonah, and they figure out that somehow it's Jonah's fault. And he says, why? They're asking Jonah, why is this awful storm coming down on us? I don't know if they didn't put that on the screen. That's okay. Why is this terrible storm coming down on us? Not just Jonah, but us. Because our actions always affect others. Always. See, if you're a teenager in here and you think your actions only affect you and it's all about your actions and what you want to do and how you want to conduct yourself, how you want to act, your actions always affect other people. If you're married in here and you think nobody's going to know what I'm looking at, nobody's going to know what I'm doing, nobody knows all the secrets in my life, and yet I'm here to tell you that if you're a man or a woman in a marriage, what you do affects your other partner. It's always us. It always ends up being us and affecting us. And here they're asking him questions because the chaos that is being sent on Jonah is affecting them too. And they start asking 4,500,000 million questions like, who are you? They want to know, who are you? What is your line of work? What country are you from? What is your nationality? We need some answers here. Need some answers of what's going on. We've been sailing for a long time. We've never seen a storm like this before. Something's going on. And Jonah said, this is almost like comical to me. It's almost comical. Listen to what Jonah says. Jonah says, oh, well, I'm a Hebrew. And I worship the Lord, God of heaven, who made the sea and the land. You got to be joking me. Isn't it interesting how that we can just spew religious rhetoric even in the midst of our own rebellion? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Well, the story, and we come to church and it's like, woo, glory to God, hallelujah, yes, Jesus. And we know good and well that we are writhing in rebellion. Well, I'm a Hebrew. I worship the God that created all this. Yeah, well, what are you doing? Why is this happening then? And they want to know what's going on. And so Jonah says this. He says in verse 12, he says, throw me into the sea. Now, when I was little, it was kind of taught to me that basically this was Jonah saying, hey, I've done wrong, and I'm kind of repenting of this. But that's not what I see at all. That's throw me into the. This is like a escape by suicide situation. I still don't want to go where I'm supposed to go. So just throw. He did not have the luxury of knowing what was going to happen when he was thrown into the sea. Do you hear what I'm saying? We know what's going to happen because, we watched the cartoon or we stuck the little men on the board, but Jonah didn't know what was going to happen. He just thought, well, you just throw me into the sea, I'll die and I still won't have to go. Throw me into the sea, Jonah said, and it will become calm again. I know that this terrible storm is all my fault. Anybody ever felt that way? This terrible storm is all this health problem is all my fault. I should have been working out. I should have been eating right. I shouldn't have been eating that. I should have been eating that instead. I shouldn't have been smoking that. I should have been doing that. Because this health problem now, it's all my fault. This debt, this Christmas debt, whatever it is, this debt is all my fault. I had the power not to hit the button, and I just kept hitting the button anyway. I had the power to stay out of my cart and not hit the pavement now, and yet I just kept punching it anyway. This debt is all my... Yes. Bye. No, now I can... It's all my fault. Maybe this night in jail, it's all my fault. Shouldn't have had the substance in my car. Shouldn't have had the substance anyway. But now, this is all my fault. This broken relationship, this divorce, this is all my fault. And this is Jonah called it a terrible storm. This terrible storm is all my fault. But I got hung on this. It seems so insignificant. But something kept sticking out to me about this. This terrible storm. And as long as I'm looking at this, I can't see him. Because I got my eyes on this. As long as I keep my eyes on my storm, I'm never going to lift my eyes to my source. I've got to get my eyes off of this. I've got to get my eyes off my storm in order to be able to see the source, my redemption. Oh, but when I lift my eyes unto the hill, where does my help come from? My help comes from the one who made the heavens and the earth. I will not look at my storm. I will get my eyes on my source. This terrible storm. That's another word I got hung on. Because in the church, we always see storms as punishment. You know what I mean? Like in our, I'm not going to go all political on us, but in our culture, in America, sometimes it feels like we are in a storm. We're in a political mess. We're in a political storm. And sometimes in the church, we can kind of rationalize that out and say, well, America is under judgment. We've done this, we've done that. And somehow we are being punished because America has fallen. It's no more in God we trust, or whatever the certain scenario is. And we automatically think that storms are punishment, and we see them as the wrath of God. But the problem with that, and this is what confused me, is in verse 14, they prayed, don't make us die for this man's sins, and don't hold us responsible for his death. Oh Lord, you have sent this storm upon him for your own, come on, somebody help me preach today, his own good reasons. So I don't understand. Is it Is it my fault? Or is it God's good reasons? It doesn't seem like it fits. I don't know if it's my fault. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe it's God's good reasons. I don't really understand. And what because we don't, in a general case, we don't like storms. None of us like storms of life. We want to avoid storms. We want to complain about storms. All storms are bad. We're even praying that God will get us out of the storm that you're in. But what if the storm is not designed for your destruction? What if the storm is actually designated to develop you and bring you into your destiny? What if the very storm that you're asking God to get you out of is actually what He is using to develop you, to bring you into the purpose that He designed for you long before the world was ever even created? What if storms aren't, what if they're not bad? You remember Joseph? Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. Then he was lied about. He was accused of rape by his boss's wife. Started to say hoochie mama, but I probably can't say that. Probably can't. I'm not supposed to say that. He gets thrown in jail. He gets thrown in jail. Then he gives a dream, and then he gets forgotten about that he was ever even in the jail. He rises to second in command of Pharaoh, the second in command of all of the land of Egypt. And his brothers eventually come and they bow before him because they need food from him. And it's a dream prophecy that he had years and years ago, saying that his brothers would bow down to him. And now all of a sudden they're scared that he is going to kill and destroy them. And he says something very, very interesting. He says, listen, the devil meant it for evil, but God meant it for, somebody preach to me today. God meant it for good. He didn't turn it for good. He didn't change it to good. He meant it for good. He meant it. There's grace in this storm. There's grace in this storm. I don't know what your storm looks like today, but I'm preaching to somebody today who is in a storm. Maybe it's a marriage storm or a spouse cheated on you storm. I came to declare to you today, there is grace in this storm. There's not just grace in that storm. There's not just grace in that. There is grace in, come on church, this storm right now. He has grace for me now. And it's a terrible storm. I can say this. I don't know any storms that we go through that we don't think is terrible. Maybe you're facing divorce papers or an angry teenager, or there's anger in this and maybe there's fighting in your family and you don't even have family that's come for Thanksgiving and they refuse to come for Christmas because there's fighting and there's bickering and there's division and there's hurt and there's pain. It's a storm, but there is grace. There is always grace in this storm. You might be thinking, well, I thought God was angry at me, or I thought I was being judged, or somehow, I don't even know if I'm going to make it through this storm. Maybe I'm going to die. Maybe it's a health storm, and you think, well, I'm going to die. This storm is going to take I'm not even going to make it through this storm. And I'm tell you today, there is always grace in this storm. There is always grace in this storm. This storm, I declare it to you today, this storm will not destroy you. It will develop you, and it is designed to bring you into your destiny. There is grace. It's a grace storm. Oh, that's a whole different level right now. There's not just grace in the storm. It's a grace storm. He is storming your life with the grace of His Son. His grace. It is His grace. It's all through the Old Testament. We think, well, the Old Testament was law and the New Testament is grace. Oh, it's riddled all through the pages. It's riddled all through the pages. There's grace permeates the pages of the Old Testament.
Thank you.
Yeah. See, and just in case you're thinking, well, Johnny, you don't understand. I'm going through this storm because I did something stupid. The storm is because I started to say because I'm stupid. But we do stupid stuff even when we're not stupid. But this is Jonah that we're talking about here. And there's some Jonah in all of us. The storm brought sailors to their knees in worship. And the storm convinced Jonah to confess his rebellion, even if it was in the bottom of the ocean, in the belly of a fish. That's grace. That's grace. God could have struck Jonah down. God could have ended his life in the bottom of the sea. Oh, but there's grace. There's grace even when... There's grace especially when we don't deserve. The purpose of storms is to steer us to seek. Storms cause us to cry out, to reach out, to call out, to confess, to pray, to worship. Storms make us desperate for the presence of God, because we don't even realize that His presence is already in the storm. Remember Peter. Peter saw Jesus walking on the water, and he said, "Hey, Lord, if it's you, let me walk out to you." And see, this is another one of those stories that we just hear so often, and we miss the miracle because we're so familiar with the message. Peter steps out of the boat and he walks on water. I don't know if you've ever tried to do that. I tried to. As a teenager, I thought, well, Peter could do it, I could do it. It didn't work out real well. It's kind of like that movie, The Shack, when Jesus says, it works better when we do this together. Anybody ever seen that? Yeah, anyway. He walks, he's walking on the water, but when he gets his eyes off of Jesus and onto the storm, he starts to sink. And the sinking is what drives him to seek Him. And he calls out to Jesus, and immediately Jesus rescues him. Because there's grace in this storm. It's a grace storm. chapter 1 kind of ends with this. There's a verse 17, but we're not going to go there. Look at verse 16. The sailors were awestruck by the Lord's power, and they offered a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. That, my friends, is what grace does. It's a grace storm. See, so often we think grace looks like God giving blessing. But what about when grace looks like trouble? Sometimes grace is aggressive. Sometimes grace will knock you to the ground while you're on your way to kill Christians. Sometimes grace is aggressive. Sometimes grace has to slap us around and give us a wake-up call and get our attention. Sometimes grace has to turn over tables and whip people with a homemade whip. What about when grace is aggressive? Yeah, we don't like that. We like the fluffy, feel-good grace. We like the happy, happy, joy grace. You don't know that. We like the don't worry, be happy grace. But that's not always the grace. Grace doesn't always come in coddling clouds and rose petals. What about when grace comes in the form of being thrown overboard and taking a cold swim in an unfriendly ocean? What about when grace is getting swallowed by a fish and taken to the depths of the earth and seaweed wrapping around your neck and breathing in and drinking in bile from the stomach of a big fish and wind up being barfed out on a beach? What about when grace looks like that? What about when grace looks like being accused of things that you did not do, being spit in the face and being beaten with a cat of 9 tails, weaved in with bone and metal? What about when grace being lied about and stripped down naked? What about when grace looks like thorns being thrust into your brow and nails into your hand? What about when grace looks like being abandoned and darkness over the earth, then dying the death on a crucifixion of a cross? What about when grace looks like that? See, that, my friends, is a grace storm. That is a storm of grace that doesn't always look pretty. We like the pictures of Jesus, and there might be a little trickle of blood, but that's not what grace looks like. Grace is aggressive, and it will not give up on you. It will not bow to this world. Grace will find you where you are, and it will overcome. See, we write Jonah off like it's a little children's story, but Jonah taught me something. Jonah taught me that even if this storm is all my fault, there's still grace in this storm. Well, I'm going to take it deeper. Jonah taught me that when it's all my fault, because I'm going to be honest with you, it's mostly always my fault. I can't stand up here with some halo, polishing my halo over my head, because it's always my fault. But even when it is my fault, there is still grace. It's a grace storm. It is a storm of grace. It reminds me what Paul said way before. Jonah never even heard of Paul. And Paul wrote the words. He said, and we know that God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. It's a grace storm, church. It is a storm of grace, and he draws me in with this grace. The chaos in my life, he uses, and he means to use it to draw me into him, to get me back on the right track, to get my eyes off of this. Come on, church, to get my eyes off of this and raise my eyes to where I can see the source of my help. And he designs and he designates the storm for my development and to propel me towards my destiny. Bow your heads, church. Father, thank you that whatever this storm is in our life, that this storm is not for our destruction. This storm is developing us for our destiny. This is a grace storm. Father, set that deep, 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 deep in our hearts today. And Lord, if we sit here today and maybe some of us are thinking, well, but it's all this storm is all my fault. God, I pray that they would hear today. Yes, but I also sent it for my good reasons. And there's still grace in this storm. Father, I pray it. We trust you and we believe it in Jesus' name. And God's people said together,